In April of 2018, former U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions instituted a new policy regarding immigration.
I have put in place a zero-tolerance policy for illegal entry on our southwest border. If you cross the border unlawfully, then we will prosecute you.
Before this policy change, anyone attempting to cross the U.S.-Mexico border without authorization was processed, detained, and sent back home. But with the new policy, all adults that crossed the border were now prosecuted. The only problem was that children were not allowed to be in federal jail, so children had to be separated from their parents. This became known as family separation.
Outcry over the separation of families at the U.S.-Mexico border.
The Trump administration is separating undocumented children from their parents at the border.
The illegal immigrants separated from their children at the border.
This was an attempt to deter migrants from entering the United States, but it faced extreme criticism.
First of all, I think we can all agree that family separation is cruel, it's inhumane, and in this case is completely unjustifiable.
Growing outrage over how the Trump administration treats illegal migrants.
This is inhumane. I'd like to say it's un-American, but it's happening right now in America, and it is on all of us, not just the Trump administration.
Only 25% of Americans supported this policy. On June 1st, protests were held across the nation in 16 different cities. Politicians from both parties were outraged and demanded justice.
We need to solve this problem. Nobody wants to see children removed from their parents. Kids belong with their moms and dads.
40 senators even sent a letter to President Trump urging him to rescind this unethical, ineffective, and inhumane policy and instead prioritize approaches that align with humanitarian and American values. This was something that was easy for people to empathize with. The idea of having one's children taken away from them was horrific to the American public. Following national criticism, on June 20th, 2018, President Trump signed an executive order ending family separation at the border. Americans were relieved. But what followed was an even worse policy.
System's full. Can't take any more. Sorry, folks. Can't take any more.
The name of the new policy was the Migrant Protection Protocols, also known as MPP or Remain in Mexico. It was first announced in December 2018 and implemented in January 2019. Don't let the name fool you, as it has done little to actually protect migrants.
Effective immediately, individuals arriving in or entering the United States from Mexico illegally or without proper documentation may be returned to Mexico for the duration of their immigration proceedings.
Because of this policy, more than 60,000 asylum seekers have been sent back to Mexico. Of those 60,000, 16,000 are children under 18, 4,300 are toddlers under 5 years old, and 481 are babies under 12 months. Before this policy, migrants fleeing persecution in their home country could travel to the United States, legally cross the border at a port of entry, and ask for asylum. An asylum officer then did something called a credible fear interview to check if the migrant was likely to face harm or death if the U.S. sent them back. If there was even a chance that they would, the asylum officer would let them into the United States to wait for a court date, where an immigration judge would make the final call. The system was flawed, but at least the migrants were safe. Under MPP, when people ask for asylum, they're sent back to Mexico to await their court hearing. But the border cities that these migrants are being sent to are some of the most dangerous in the world. These people fled from their homes, hoping to find refuge in the US, only to be forced to live under the threat of violence from drug cartels and kidnappers. Tijuana and Juarez have the first and fifth highest murder rates in the world, respectively, and Matamoros and Nuevo Laredo are both run by cartels.
Last year, it was about 10 killings per day.
10 killings per day?
10 killings.
It's unbelievable.
It's like 1 every 2 hours.
They will find you. They'll torture you and your family. Generally, they'll find your family and they torture them in front of you. They take videos. They will tell you what's going to happen to you. And usually, they will kill you.
Our own State Department has even issued do not travel warnings for many of these areas. That's the same threat level as Syria and Iraq. The U.S. government has said that they have tried to keep these migrants safe.
We're sending a message to the criminal organizations to stop exploiting these migrants and their profit-making schemes.
But apparently that message hasn't had much of an impact.
A new study shows that 1 in 4 legal asylum seekers who were forced to remain in Mexico while their cases are considered have been threatened with physical violence.
There have been more than 1,000 public reports of murder, torture, rape, kidnapping, and other violent attacks against migrants sent back to Mexico under MPP in the past year. And that's not even including the crimes that go unreported. These are people who came to us for help, and we sent them away. Many of them have saved up money to come to the U.S., making them sitting ducks for extortion.
They told them if they didn't pay $10,000, they were going to start cutting off our body parts, beginning with my daughter. When my family said no, they hit me because they thought I was lying.
How can I stay in Mexico when I fled my country for the same reasons? There are a lot of criminals here. It's very dangerous. I've been out only twice since I came here because I'm afraid to be out with my girls.
The U.S. is making it especially easy for the cartels to identify and snatch victims. They're sending asylum seekers back in big groups, all at once, at the same time each day, and they're easy to identify through plastic bags and missing shoelaces.
In Nuevo Laredo, the most dangerous part of these asylum seekers' journey is probably the hours right after they've been sent back to Mexico. After walking across the bridge, they're transported to the Mexican immigration office by van. Outside the office, men in 4-door trucks monitor who's coming and going.
When I first showed up in the camp, a woman came up to me and asked me if we would be bringing in condoms because when she got sexually assaulted again, she wanted to be able to ask her attacker to wear a condom so she wouldn't get pregnant.
To make matters worse, people can't even trust their own law enforcement.
Que me iban a matar, pero algunas veces piden pruebas sobre eso, pero uno no las tiene porque no puede hacer una denuncia. Las autoridades están involucradas en la delincuencia.
In the United States, when something goes wrong, we have the privilege of knowing that we can call the police, but in Mexico border cities, law enforcement is extremely corrupt. For example, in 2011, 7 top officials at Mexico's immigration agency were fired amid allegations that the agency was involved in the kidnapping of migrants. Mexican police officers are particularly vulnerable to corruption and infiltration by drug cartels because of low salaries and lack of governmental support. This makes bribes extremely attractive. The United States government knows that Mexico is unsafe, but we send asylum seekers there anyway.
The government of Mexico has agreed to provide them while they're waiting in Mexico with appropriate humanitarian protections.
Well, it seems like that was a lie, because even if asylum seekers manage to avoid the cartels and stay alive, they are still basically homeless in a country that they do not know. Some migrants are lucky to find housing in shelters, hotels, or rooms for rent, but for most, they are forced to live in encampments where they rely on volunteers for basic necessities like clean drinking water and warm clothes.
She says she's really worried about her kids. They're not getting enough water. They're not living a very healthy life right now.
There's no access to proper sanitation or running water, leading to poor hygiene.
Most everyone here has some form of GI something or other, different types of tapeworms and ringworms. And the problem is that you treat it, and then they come right back out and they get it again.
Basic healthcare services come from US-based nonprofits such as Global Response Management, but they are stretched thin. Other volunteers cross the border daily, bringing supplies like bedding and food.
Yo pensé que al entrar a Estados Unidos, como estaba la ley, que íbamos a quedarnos allá en Estados Unidos. No importara que me tuviera un albergue, pero por lo menos mi hija no estuviera aquí en las condiciones que estamos con.
If a kid shows up to the border without an adult, the border agents have to let them into the United States. They can't send them back. So sometimes parents will send their children to ports of entry alone, believing that they will be safer in the US than in the camps.
You have thousands of people stuck there, right on our border. 2 big governments, the United States and Mexico, one of them, of course, a lot richer than the other. And nobody's looking after these people, with food and water and shelter, except a bunch of volunteers who raised their hands and said, "We cannot ignore this."
Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen is being sued over a new policy that will force some asylum seekers to wait in Mexico. American Civil Liberties Union and Southern Poverty Law Center believe the new initiative violates several U.S. and international human rights laws.
In a decision blocking MPP, the Ninth Circuit Court found that the government had no authority to send asylum applicants to a neighboring country under long-standing immigration laws. The opinion read, "Uncontested evidence in the record establishes that non-Mexicans returned to Mexico under the MPP risk substantial harm, even death, while they await adjudication of their applications for asylum."
There's a handful of laws that they believe that they're violating here, but the big one is the 1980 Refugee Act. And it specifically says that the United States is not allowed to send back an individual who believes they fear persecution in their home country. The United States is not allowed to do that under this nearly 40-year-old act.
In U.S. asylum law, there's a principle called non-refoulement, which says that we can't send migrants back to a situation where they get harmed or killed. So if there is any chance an asylum seeker could be in danger, the asylum officer is supposed to let them into the United States. However, the Ninth Circuit Court's decision was blocked by the Trump administration.
The Ninth Circuit initially on Friday blocked the so-called Remain in Mexico program, finding that it is likely illegal. But hours later in the night, the same court paused its own order granting an emergency request by Trump administration lawyers who rushed to defend the policy and argued in court that there could be a surge at the southern border if the initial order remained in place.
This was later upheld by the Supreme Court, negating the Ninth Circuit's ruling.
The Supreme Court allowed the Trump administration's Remain in Mexico asylum policy to stand Wednesday. Justices overturned a lower court decision that found the policy was illegal and blocked it from being enforced in Arizona and California. Justice Sonia Sotomayor was the only dissenting vote.
The chances of a migrant receiving asylum now are slim. Because they're forced to wait in Mexico, it's almost impossible for them to find a lawyer to represent them in the United States. Only 2% can find legal representation. Out of 47,000 MPP cases, only 11 have been granted asylum. MPP is arguably a lot worse than family separation. However, it is not receiving nearly as much public outcry. Where are the protests? Where's the outrage from Congress? Just like with family separation, we have the power to change our government's policies. MPP needs more immediate attention. More people need to care about this. Family separation was overturned in 1 month. We can do better. The Trump administration has even labeled MPP a success.
So from a law enforcement perspective, as the acting commissioner of CBP, MPP has absolutely been successful.
But does this look like success to you?